singing together, as Bernice Johnson Reagan says, and you charge the air with your life force, and you put that with other people charging the air with their life force, you can make something happen. You can make miracles happen internally, externally. And, those who are not excited about the liberation of all people everywhere certainly wouldn't want us growing that technology. And not to say that there's a conspiracy theory, somebody stopping us from congregational singing, but it's such a powerful tool that I feel like it's not actively encouraged, But what I find, Angela, is that wherever I go and I activate it, even if it's like not words, we're just sort of improvising, or we're just all chanting this phrase and seeing what melodies arise. It's so powerful. People are so excited. They feel something.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. What does it mean to hold space for the practice of freedom, creativity, movement, liberation? Well, we're going to talk to someone today who does just that. Sangodare, a filmmaker, a sermon maker, a song bearer, a person who really exemplifies what it means to bear witness to culture and tradition, as well as to bring sweet transformation into the world.
My name is Sangodare Wallace. If I put all my given and spiritual names together, it's Sangodare Obanike Akinwale Julia Roxanne Wallace. I am 44 years old, and I show up in the world as a sweet space for transformation. I used to say a safe space for transformation, but sometimes transformation doesn't feel safe. So I changed that to sweet. And I show up in the world also as a Black, queer, gender nonconforming person.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being on our podcast today. It's been a long time since I've had an opportunity to be in conversation with you. So I'm especially looking forward to what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, me too.
Yes.
Me too.
Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and some formative moments in your childhood.
Okay. Well, I was born in Gastonia, North Carolina, because my dad was pastoring a church in Gastonia. But mostly I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's where most of my family is on my dad's side. And I would say probably the most formative aspect of my childhood is the Black Baptist Church in the Carolinas. The hymn singing, the food, the culture, of course, the preaching, and just really what it is to be in community. I was formed to be in community and be in the world. I was really formed by that context. And when I think about other formative childhood experiences, the next one is the making of Thriller. So that's not the music video Thriller, it's the making of Thriller. My parents used to rent a VCR from the grocery store, and also you could rent the VHS tape, The Making of Thriller. And I was maybe 4 years old, and it was just so exciting to me. The studio, the makeup, the dancing, the music, the drama of it. I would watch it, over and over again. They would rent it multiple times, and that was really formative. When I think of things that I can even remember from that far back, that stands out crisp and clear. And really just, music in general, definitely a strong part of my growing up, from singing in choirs to when I got my first sequencer and started making music on my own keyboard. Those are a couple things.
I also read in your bio that you were the piano player for your church choir. Am I recalling that correctly?
Well, actually, I was kind of like the backup piano player. So if we were in choir rehearsal, and the piano player needed to maybe was also the director and had to direct, I maybe would be the one that would play. Or if if I'm playing around with my cousins or something, I might play something. Or like a special occasion, I'm gonna play Now Behold the Lamb for the Christmas program. And a couple times I would get behind my dad and play like, preaching accompaniment. But the most of my playing was when I was minister of music at Unity Fellowship of Christ Church in Atlanta for a year or two.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
you were at Unity.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a lovely congregation. It's just doing incredible work here in Atlanta still. You are a PK. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how that molded or negotiated the way you developed as a person.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I have somewhat unique experience in that being a preacher's kid was normal to me because I had so many cousins that were also preacher's kids. And it was as I got older that I started to notice that there was sort of a mythology or story about preacher's kids, and people would relate to me based on that mythology. But really, I mean, I feel like, well, one, my dad is, I think, still the most progressive in our family. He taught and preached liberation theology. He supported women preaching when a lot of people in my family didn't necessarily, and was very open-minded and thinking about and talking about theology from other faiths and other spiritual traditions, in particular Buddhism. And so for me, it was a nurturing space, even at the same time that there was mostly implicit homophobia and a little bit explicit. So I didn't necessarily feel safe to be out, but I still felt free to be a theological thinker, to be someone that asked questions about God and religion. And say the other aspect of being a PK is my dad was gone a lot. He was, working in church ministry, visiting the sick and shut in, going to conferences and things like that. And my mom really held us down because, well, maybe some people don't know, but being a preacher isn't necessarily the most economical, sustainable field, especially back in those days. And in the Baptist church, you're not a part of one of those other mainline denominations where, they assign you a search and, there's sort of like a norm and a standard for sustainability. Anyway, my mom really held us down. And so she also wasn't there a lot. So I spent a lot of time with other families that were members of our church. I spent a lot of time singing in choirs and stuff like that. But it created for me this world of being a PK created for me a deep and strong foundation in, I could say, religion, but what's valuable about that for me now is spiritual practice, like what it is to value spending time praying, spending time studying scripture, spending time thinking theologically, spending time singing. Like my family would get together and just sing for hours. And so those are really, really profound gifts that I get to carry with me now and share with other people.
When I think about African American religious experience in this country, to me, there's something special about talking about how folks in southern states, certainly the Carolinas and Gullah country, I mean, how they experienced and carried forth a tradition that's really very different from those of us who came from the Midwest. It's a rootedness that I think is quite special and fundamental. I'm curious, in light of that, how that bedrock of a religious space affected the way in which you were able to understand who you were as a being in this world, who's gender nonconforming, who's queer. How did you emerge in that space, and how did your religious experience shape that, mold that, massage that?
Yeah. I the foundation for me is God is love. And I had language for that as a child, and I had a child's understanding, but an understanding enough of that as a child. And anything that sort of felt like it was had tension with that, I always questioned. That doesn't really, um, make sense. And I think beyond that, I wouldn't have had this particular language then, but beyond that, I also understood that God is infinite. The divine is infinite. And so the things that we are saying, the things that we think, the rules that we have, just seem like there's some inconsistencies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like for me coming up, understanding that, like, I wanted to wear suits like my dad. I didn't want to wear dresses. It was normal, so it wasn't like I was strongly resistant to it, but I was really excited to, wear suits. And so when I got old enough to wear pantsuits to church, that was really exciting to me. But having having desires like that, and then understanding that God is infinite, and the stories in the Bible are so expansive. So many different kinds of things are happening. And yet we're putting what felt like arbitrary limits on ourselves. Like, I'm thinking about what the men in the Bible wore. It's like, well, wait, they wear dresses. Why can't I wear pants? And I feel like because I had that, like with everything, I felt free enough to constantly be asking questions. And I don't know if other people have this experience, but when you're in sort of even if it's a progressive, when you're in a sort of Christian theology conversation, even if you're allowed to ask questions and get answers, a lot of times the answers don't really add up. And so that gave me a lot of freedom. I wouldn't say that it was a rooted freedom, but it was at least a freedom enough to say, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right, until I got older, 18, 20, and was reading, liberation theology and learning about other people's perspectives, that I was able to tie it back to some of those early things. God is love. That, miracles are possible. There's no male or female in Christ. All of these things, it's like that the seeds were there, even though they weren't being nurtured in my family, they still were there and were able to bloom, much later. And I think that to me is even an example of the technology of miracle. It's like the possibility, the presence of the thing you want, need, desire is right there. It's like just a slight shift of perspective or a slight allowing, and then it all shows up. And I feel like that's the experience that I began to have probably right around the time I was graduating from undergraduate school and moving to Atlanta and developing relationships with people in Unity Fellowship and the Candler School of Theology at Emory community.
What you say to me speaks of a great deal of agency and critical thinking. And I'm wondering if your father, with his theological expansiveness, was a vehicle for you to be able to ask and question and probe to get your own grounding in your own spiritual space. How much of an influence was he, especially as we will begin to talk about preaching and the church?
Yeah, he was a big influence, even just his approach. Like he would he would pull sermon titles from popular songs on the radio, what's love got to do with it, or, if loving you is wrong, I don't want to be right, things like that. So he was really interested in being in conversation intergenerationally about theology and about God. And, I was out of the house at this time, but he also started working with a Bible college. It's sort of one of those informal theology schools that develops their own accreditation within not so much an academic system, but some other religious system. So he worked with one of those schools and then developed his own. So he was about the business of having these conversations and being open to them. And this is just natural in me. I am able to ask questions that don't feel threatening. Like, my questions aren't, well, if, the Bible says no male or female in Christ Jesus, then why I would never came like that. I always came with curiosity and, interest and excitement. And I think he was always able to respond to me in kind. But it was when, so I'd come out to my mom, and I'd, been back to college, and I was home for a visit, and I was there with some friends. And my dad basically preached on the couch. Basically, we were having a conversation, but on the couch, he preached the Ethiopian eunuch to us. And the Ethiopian eunuch is, in the Bible, represents someone who transcends race, gender, class, sexuality, ethnicity. And I feel like it was his way of saying, I've found a theological way to make this make sense and support you to know that, you're all right. And this Ethiopian eunuch is the first, represents the fulfillment of Jesus's, prophecy. You will be my witnesses in Judea and until the uttermost parts of the earth. And so that I'm really fortunate to have had that, even at the same time that if there's no queer people in your community, or the people who do seem to transgress gender or sexuality are not accepted, celebrated, and embraced, you still get that implicit and explicit sort of suppression of sexualities that are beyond the norm. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I have to really be grateful, because I've seen people who have not had that love and support that I did have, and it really does make a big difference. And even when I started studying and practicing Ifa Orisha traditions, my dad, my mom were supported and found ways to be supportive and engage me. So I'm grateful.
Let's talk about that religious transformation and how the significance of your name change and the significance of your coming to appreciate this other religious side of yourself has shaped who you are.
Yeah, well, there's a point in my childhood, probably around third grade or so, that I started learning about, the enslavement period and the continent of Africa. Maybe Roots was out somewhere in this time period. So I started to have these questions like, okay, well, what did we practice before we did this, before we were, Christians? And that kind of came alongside of, in the Bible, they doing all these miracles. We're a family of preachers and ministers and church workers. How come we're not doing more miracles? And so I feel like these sort of, or miracles that I could perceive. And so I feel like that I had these questions, and I would get a little glimmer of something here, a little glimmer of something there. But in theology school, learning about, deeply learning about Buddhism and practicing meditation thoughtfully, and then connecting that to the biblical text and Jesus watching all night and his 40 days fasting and things like that. Learning about Hinduism and the many aspects of God infinite. And then after theology school, meeting my godmother, Ianifa Love Tashia Asante and learning about Ifa Orisha tradition and having a divination. And it was like a click, and I think that that's what's so important about honoring one's desire. Is if we can honor our desires and follow them, our intuition will let us know when we're on the right track. And I certainly felt myself to be on the right track when engaging this wonderful and beautiful tradition and being able to see how it connects to the Christian tradition and how all of the faiths that I learn about and the religious and spiritual traditions I learn about, especially the earth-based ones and the indigenous ones, it's many paths, but it's one truth, right? And even in the Christian tradition, there's so much that is not present because, some folks with power came together and created and gathered the biblical text in ways that served them. They encouraged certain things and certain practices, and they repressed other practices. And so I feel like the more that I learned, the more that I've studied, but more importantly, the more that I've been in spiritual practice, the resonances are there, and I don't find any contradiction. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm disheartened and saddened by people who, for whatever reason, whether it's because they're dogmatic, because they are evangelical in a way that doesn't allow them to expand and look, explore. It's really sad to me when people's faiths and their spiritual practice doesn't grow, to be dedicated in such a way that the fullness of your experience of the infinite and the divine doesn't get, bigger. That just breaks my heart. And I think that heartbreak allows me a lot of compassion for folks who are having that experience. And then that compassion creates a lot of safety for me, if that makes sense. So whereas I could feel a lot of harm coming from people who are homophobic based on their religiosity, I don't feel that because I'm just so sad by the limits and the box that they've put on themselves and put on God. Now, that could just be a coping mechanism for me, but it works.
Well, it sounds like a sweet transformation, and one that is risky. I like what you said earlier about, not saying, safe transformation, but sweet, because transformation and growth is risk. And certainly, I think when we come to a place where, as an adult, when we can fully appreciate our religious experience and then also embrace the other things that Spirit tells us and brings to us, it's very sweet. Thinking of that, and looking at the history of the role of preaching and the role of congregational singing in our community, how important have those things been to the thriving of Black folks? And how are you transforming that in the work that you're doing now? I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, me too. It's technology. It's a powerful technology, one of the most powerful technologies I know of for transferring and transmitting spiritual practice, energy, ashe, the life force energy and power, the stories that we draw from preaching and from the songs that we sing, the invisible and intangible transfer of that power that has sustained us as Black folks for hundreds of years in, very precarious situations. And it's a tool that if you have it, you can use it when you need to. And you can even create other tools from it. And for me, it really is an inheritance. It's a birthright. It's a legacy that I get to share with other people that didn't grow up with this particular technology. And those who didn't grow up with any, but that can have access to it through me. And I feel like, just like meditation is one of the most powerful tools for spiritual growth and transformation. That's singing those old songs with the same folks for generations, and getting to that point where it feels like it's just mantra and you're singing it over and over and over again, and it's swelling and it's speeding up, and you can have transcendent experience through that. It really is powerful technology. And preaching as well, I think differently because it's engaging, your mind a bit more, but it's also powerful technology for this transfer and for healing, which I guess is implicit. And I really think about it as my wealth. It really is my wealth, and when I'm able to lean into that, some people's family grew up and they're all welders, or they're all architects, or and they can make a life out of that vocation, or go out and explore and know that they always have that to come back to. That's something that I found to be true for me, and in nonlinear ways. Like, I don't even have to think of it as a service that I give and then I receive some form of value or money for it. It's a wealth that if I will practice and share the practice, abundance flows.
Well, I love how you talk about technology, because so many people think about preaching as something anyone can do. All they have to do is stand up in front of a congregation and say something, as opposed to a certain working of spirit and word that shows up in a very blessed way to give people what they need to survive. And certainly that's been something that's been so important, as I think about Zora Neale Hurston talking about the poet and the preacher, the preacher as poet in our community. I'm especially interested in how your artistic work involves sermonic technology and music. Speak to us about some of the projects, one in particular I'm thinking about, where you have used preaching as an artistic vehicle.
For me, like how do I get into this? Culture is for growth, and our cultural practices are for growth and transformation. And so that's my standard. That's the legacy that I want to leave in my filmmaking with Black Feminist Film School, in my spiritual practice, in my artistic practice. That's really the legacy that I want to leave. So, culture is for growth, and we're all spirit beings, so that growth is spiritual growth. So, so when I'm engaging preaching or sermonizing, it really is a transcendent experience for me. It's a portal that opens up at the intersection of what I'm growing through, amen, Angie Harvey, what I'm growing through, and what our community is being challenged by. And there's an intuition, and I talked about a portal, but there's an intuition and a download that occurs when I'm making space to receive those insights. And it's a beautiful space for me. It's fun. It's exciting. It's playful. I'm drawing on, sacred texts from the Bible, but also the Odu Ifa, which is the Yoruba Ifa Orisha wisdom text, but also for a Course in Miracles or the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm weaving that with God Infinite wherever I find that divine energy, which is in, music, whether it's Michael McDonald and Aretha Franklin, or whoever it might be. I think even Bobby Brown had some insight in there, because if you can get to a place, if you can get to the vibration where everywhere you look, you see that divine energy, you can find a lesson. You can find something valuable for us. And so that's where my preaching comes from. And I'd say it's the most exciting thing that I do, but it's also a lot of work, and it's a huge responsibility. And so for me, I could preach extemporaneously, but at the same time, we all have so many wounds and so much trauma, and it can be really easy to be saying the right thing, the good thing, the loving thing, and it still be triggering for people. So for me, the hard work of it, and it's a work I'm still excited to do, but the hard work of it is being as specific as possible so that the most people as possible have access to the love that's present in what I'm allowing to come through. So it really is a practice of allowing love to come through so people can be so present to love that whatever imbalance, whatever struggles they're dealing with, some of that can melt away. Some of that can like come down and be quiet enough that they can access that level up or access that new possibility. And I feel like that's what I got to witness growing up. I got to witness my grandfather preaching and people falling out. I got to witness my dad and my uncles preaching and people testifying about the difference that it made in their lives, the tangible difference that it made in their lives. And I got to experience even one of my aunts preaching in such a way. And this is the thing about miracles also, that moment of brand new, whether it's a healing, an ailment, or just changing your mind. She preached in such a way that I knew, oh, you can preach, you can do that. Yeah, so I have this example, and that's why I talk about it as my wealth, because I know that I can do it at the same time that I know that it's not easy and that it's not something to be taken lightly. And at the same time, it is one of the most valuable traditions we have as African Americans and as folks in the African diaspora, because there's a through line there as well.
When did you first realize that you had a gift, and the loaded word, a call to preach?
Well, I would love to say that it was in theology school in a preaching class that I took, but actually that was one of the most traumatic experiences I've had. It was when the Pauline Center here in Durham was having a sermon and poetry slam in honor of Pauline Murray. And the director at the time, Barbara Lau, invited me to give a sermon. And, I think I had like 7 minutes, 5 minutes or something like that. And it was doing that sermon that turned that light on for me, preparing for it, giving it, and then seeing the difference that it made in me, but also in the people that were there to witness it. And that that wasn't but maybe like 12 years ago. So I was 32, something like that. Yeah, so it was not all those other years inside of a church context or religious or spiritual context. I knew I had things to say. I knew I had music to offer, but I would not have thought it would be possible for me to preach or to be a preacher or to sermonize like I have since. What
so many people say is missing in so many Black religious spaces is the gift of congregational singing, because now we have people who are standing in front of you, for those who are in quote unquote Black churches, who are singing for you. And the congregation is no longer participating in that very moving experience. And I love how you talked about this almost mantra effect of singing and being moved. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Barbara Holmes, but she talks about the contemplative tradition in African American music. And she was at Mississippi Boulevard Church in Memphis, Tennessee, and listen as this congregation went into this song, and it was just this meditative, contemplative tradition that I think we see in certain places in our congregations. And when people aren't invited into that space, I really wonder what is lost when congregations can no longer sing together and be in those sacred vibrations. Certainly we saw it in the civil rights movement, the importance of music. We see it within our tradition of Negro spirituals. What is your take on congregational singing, its importance, and how we don't see a lot of that anymore? I mean, so much has changed.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great loss. It's a great loss. I think it's always good to add more to our musical traditions and our contemplative practices. But I think to take away or to allow to go dormant is a loss. And I even think about like my nibblings and, the children of my nibblings are the children of my siblings, but also my cousins' kids who aren't singing together like we used to growing up. And I think it's a loss of power. I talked about it as well, because when you, as Bernice Johnson Reagan says, and you charge the air with your life force, and you put that with other people charging the air with their life force, you can make something happen. You can make miracles happen internally, externally. And, those who are not excited about the liberation of all people everywhere certainly wouldn't want us growing that technology. And not to say that there's a conspiracy theory, somebody stopping us from congregational singing, but it's such a powerful tool that I feel like it's not actively encouraged, just really surprising to me. But what I find, Angela, is that wherever I go and I activate it, even if it's like not words, we're just sort of improvising, or we're just all chanting this phrase and seeing what melodies arrive. It's so powerful. People are so excited. They feel something. I know I was somewhere and I sang for some people. It's like a intuition retreat or something like that. And they talked about in their traditions, I'm going to the synagogue and it's wonderful, or I'm going to this church and I love it, but I want to feel something, and they talked about how me singing and activating that in the space allowed them to feel something. So it's something I feel like that we all need, we all benefit from. And every tradition that I've ever heard of across the whole planet has some form of this collective singing, this collective sound making together. And it has lasted because it is such a powerful technology, and a way to transfer even specific knowledge through lyrics, aside from just the energetic and spiritual power.
I was speaking to you earlier today before we started about the fact that this morning was kind of rough for me, so I had to pull up an old gospel song. And I sometimes tease people, say, okay, well, today is rough. Give me a Negro spiritual, give me a gospel song. And because I do find that there's power in that. I think of growing up and kind of like you said, being in a family where we would get together, my extended family, and sing. And I knew about the Davis sisters. I knew about the Barrett sisters. About Alex Bradford. I mean, all these old singers and my uncles who had a quartet, and it just seems like the power and the shifting of that vibration is not appreciated as much as I would love to see it. So I'm always inspired by people like yourself who understand it, and the role of transformative liberation preaching, and who feel and flood the space with that. Because it seems like we're at a place where every time you turn on the news or you pick up the paper or you're talking to somebody, something else has happened. And there's so many microaggressions that we experience in this world as all sorts of people. And so for me, I think music, art, all of those things are transformative. Also transformative is the lens that we put on the world and how we shape the story. So I'm curious to now talk about your life as a filmmaker and the work you're doing with the Black Feminist Film School.
I used to think it was in college that I sort of got in touch with filmmaking. And there's a certain truth to that, but actually it's the storytelling in church, in the sermons, and the drama of church, the multidisciplinary arts. You've got the music, you've got the performance and the dancing, the testimonies, and everything else. You've got the costuming and like what we're wearing. So it's really a multidisciplinary art space. And I think I drew from that in college when I was working on an individual degree in multimedia computer science. And two of the classes I really loved was a video course and then especially an editing course. But still, I didn't think I could become a filmmaker. It wasn't till I was in theology school and it dawned on me, oh, I could do that. Even though I grew up, my mom taking me to film all the time, that was like our pastime. It never occurred to me that I could be a filmmaker until it did. So then after theology school, I went to film school and I became obsessed with the way filmmaking could lend itself to world making and what that world making could be rooted in. It could be rooted in spiritual practice, spiritual tradition, lessons, even just the sort of side eye of satire, where it's like somebody's making fun, but now you can see how ridiculous maybe something you're thinking or doing is. And, if you're going to a mainstream, predominantly white institution, you'll have a particular kind of experience, regardless of the discipline. And so what I was learning in my film program was that the tools and resources that I needed for the type of films I wanted to make were coming from the Black feminists that I was in relationship with, like Layli Phillips Mopayan, Sista Docta Alexis, Pauline, Gumbs, and others. And so I said, you know what? I'm gonna not pay any more tuition. Let's start Black Feminist Film School and I'll just get my degree there. And so that's what we created. And it is what it sounds like. It's filmmaking in the Black feminist tradition and drawing from Black feminist legacies. And for me, it's not just about, it's about Black feminism. So this liberation possibility for all people. And it's not just about, the Black people or Black women making films. It's about making this growth and transformation the standard for culture. And it's a really exciting time for us because we had a successful fundraising campaign. Audre Lorde's birthday is coming up in a few days, and it'll be her 90th birthday year. And Alexis is going to be with Ada Gay Griffith and Michelle Parkinson for 2 screenings of A Litany for Survival, one in Pittsburgh, and I think the other one's in at Black Star in, where's that? Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. And so we've been going on film outings, on social media. Alexis has been able to do a Facebook Live with Anjanae Ellis, who is the star of Origin, directed by Ava DuVernay. So we are really ramping up to, actualize this vision and this dream for sharing tools through a tool bank, for supporting people who also are in alignment with this intention, this mission that we have to make growth and transformation a standard for all media making. And so it's an exciting time in the life of Black Feminist Film School.
I love the idea of doing it, just doing it, going out there and getting your tools in hand and doing it, because there's something I think that we all can do a story, we all can tell. And sometimes folks may feel like, well, all I have is my little cell phone or I just have my little digital recorder. What would you say to that person who says, I think I have a story to tell, but I don't have all the fancy equipment. How do I go forth and get my story out there and leave my legacy?
Well, you said it exactly. And that is practice with what you have where you're at, and continue to get better and pay attention to the ways that the type of films or media or episodic programs that you enjoy, pay attention, like deep meditative study attention to how they're doing it and what you love about it, and just practice. If it's a 1 minute silent film that you make with your phone, or it's a series of photos that you take and you put narration behind it, we can all start wherever we are. And that's what I love about the workshops that we do from time to time. We really want people to come in and stay with us for 2 to 4 hours. And when you come out, you are a filmmaker because you made a film. And to not relate to it like, if you can't be, Ava DuVernay or Spielberg or something like that, then you don't have access to it. We really, especially now, we all have so much more access to it. And I would say, in addition to that, ask for help. Like, there's somebody that maybe just knows a little bit more than you. Well, work with them, and then once you know what they know, maybe there's somebody who knows a little bit more than they knew, and then you work with them. And I think it's important that we keep telling our stories, but especially letting those stories be portals for the insight and the voice of authority that we have developed. If there's something you figured it out, you fixed it in yourself, then to be able to amplify that insight through story is one of the most powerful things we can do while we're on this planet.
How often do you all offer those workshops, and are they located in Durham or are they virtual? How can people get involved with that if they're interested?
Well, at this point, we're doing things monthly or more. A lot of writing workshops now, but as it starts to warm up, we are going to be doing more in person. So we like to get folks sort of oriented and in a practice while they're at home. And for some folks that aren't able to come here, that might be the extent of what they do. But if you are able to come seasonally, we'll be doing what I call Black Feminist Film School production intensives. So we come together and we make a film. And I want to say explicitly that we think of filmmaking as spiritual practice. This growth and transformation standard that we're creating is spiritual growth and transformation. So yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we are ramping up and amplifying the work that we're doing more, so that we can have capacity to, once we start, continue, so that this can be something that people can lean on to continue to develop. So starting where we are, whether it's with a phone or a camera, and then continuing to develop and know that that's something that they can lean into and not necessarily have to go to a traditional school or traditional film school that is not Black feminist, that does not have the accreditation, the credit and support of your Black feminist elders, and that doesn't have the endowment of that legacy that is going to continue to pour into you. We really want to be able to come together and pour into ourselves and pour into each other. And Angela, draw from the legacy of what I'm starting to think of as the unsung heroes of historically Black educational institutions. I know we have HBCU, but there are other educational institutions like the dance companies and the theater companies pulling from that legacy and creating institutions that, truth be told, is a queer legacy in large part. Not to say all of them, but a lot of them, we have a queer legacy of historically Black educational institutions. And so we're excited to pull from that through line and let it just keep going. It may evolve and become something else, but that through line can continue. And we're excited to be a part of it.
Oh gosh, that is so exciting. We just the way in which you have called that out, those educational institutions like dancing. I mean, just like what you said. Oh, that is amazing. And it's I could stop there for a moment because it's so true, because I think oftentimes we limit those opportunities for learning in our communities. And those are the things that have sustained us. Those are the things that have conjured the space for those of us to do the work that we do in the world. And so often I think we believe that if I can't be bestowed the title of something by a higher institution or someone else who's been doing the work, then my work is not valued. How dare I call myself a filmmaker? How dare I call myself that when I've not gotten the degree done and met with these wonderful people? So there's something powerful, I think, in talking about the practice and the spiritual tradition in that art and doing that work. So I love the way you're framing that and you're doing the work of that.
Yeah. Those institutions that we, often think of like we can really pop our collar once we have paper from there are actually the site of a lot of trauma. Like, folks coming out of those institutions and having to spend years, they learned some things and made some relationships, maybe even enhanced their capacity to raise their income, but still have, a lot of trauma and harm and things that we have to unlearn. So I think, it's important for us to put things in proper perspective. And I think, you speak to that. And with that proper perspective, we can make something new happen, even inside those institutions, to be able to understand like, this is not all it's cracked up to be. And we have access to better and to more through relationship, really.
I feel like we could talk all day because there's so many wonderful dimensions of the work you're doing and the work you have done. I have two more questions. The first being, as we talk about legacy and naming and tradition and practice, what is one creative work you've done in the world that you're just so excited about and that really speaks to your presence in the world and you're glad you were able to gift it to us?
I had the opportunity to work with Toshi Regan, who's an amazing singer, songwriter, producer, created along with her mother, Bernice Johnson Regan, Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower opera. Toshi has been in relationship here in this area, the Durham and Chapel Hill area, working on that and other collaborations. So I had the opportunity to work with Toshi because one of the things that she believes in is like, yes, it's great when institutions, and this was UNC in particular, bring folks from outside, but there are also, artists that are working locally that could benefit from those, from that exposure, but also from those resources. And so she really supported me, big sibling style, to create a musical piece. And I call it Transcend. And it really is like a scripted church service. So there's singing and congregational singing. There's Black feminist chanting and mantras woven through my sermonics. And I'm really excited about that. We did a works in progress show of it in, 2021, a couple of years ago at North Star Church of the Arts, which is a legacy project of the Freeline family, Nina Freeline and Phil Freeline and Pierce Freeline and Maya Freeline and their whole family. And that was great. I got to do it with Toshi's band. And then Toshi pushed me to develop my own band, pull together my own choir and do it. And we did that just here in November in this area. And it really was powerful. And it really was amazing. And I'm excited to do more of it. And it's called Transcend.
Is there footage of that where folks can see that?
There is not. I have some footage of the rehearsal that I will be sharing on sangodare.com. That's my website, Sangodare, SANGODARE.com. And one more thing I'll say is Quirk created a technology company called Quirk, and you can find out more about that at quirk.app. That's QUIRC.app. And it is a technology to connect us. We go to these amazing events, Angela, and you know that feeling at the end of it when like people don't want to leave and like you're excited, something new feels lit in you and you just don't know what to do with that energy. Like you're like, I've always wanted to, but I never did it. But now that I feel so possible, how can I? So this is an app that's not so much about socializing, but it's about connecting to create our projects and to bring our gifts to the world. And we call it Quirk because it's a queer circuit. It's a energy builder. It's a connector. It's an amplifier for us in the Q BIPOC community. To share our gifts with the world. If you want to make a podcast, if you want to start a business, who are the folks in this community that have that specific resource and tool that you can be matched with? So it is a matching platform to make that dream, that vision come true.
Wow, that sounds amazing. The final question I have for you is there something I did not ask, a question you would have loved to have answered, something you think our listeners should know before we end this wonderful time together?
Well, I would just love to encourage us all to stay free, to be who we are, honor our desires in the moment and broadly. That is like my biggest insight of this year. It don't have to make sense. We could just be free. We don't have to know how to do it. We can just be free and ask for help. The whole universe is conspiring to help and support us. And that's a mantra that I've really been working with. We don't have to be normal. We don't even have to be easy. We can be free.
Ooh, what a word. Thank you for that benediction. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Sangodare, thank you for being part of our Black lesbian history.
Thank you for having me.
I love it when we are given the opportunity of standing in light and reflecting it. I think that's what artists do in the world. We reflect the light of divine energy in the work that we do. And I'm especially excited by how Sangodare talks about giving others the opportunity of learning how to point their lens in the world and tell their story. And maybe the thing that I would like our listeners to take from this episode is the fact that, you got a story and you have a vehicle, a way of telling it. And those stories and those vehicles are many and wide. Whatever is your story, and however you choose to bring it about in the world, I just wish you the energy of making that so, of bringing it into the world, of looking at the tradition you hold within your culture and being a bearer of that, just the same way that Sangodare is. I am so grateful for our time together. If you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you share it. Send the link to someone you think would appreciate the conversation we had today. And leave a rating and a review wherever you listen to this podcast. It really does make a difference. My friends, thank you for listening. And until next time, have a sweet one.
Hey.